When we speak about taqwa, most people instinctively imagine external signs, longer prayers, softer speech, more generous charity, and a visibly religious lifestyle. And yes, these are real and meaningful manifestations, but they do not form the foundation. They are merely the branches. The roots are hidden beneath the surface, unseen, unrecognized, and often uncelebrated. True taqwa begins in the quiet places of the heart, in those internal movements that happen long before a word is spoken or a deed is performed. It is a transformation that occurs silently, quietly, and almost imperceptibly, yet it reshapes a person's entire identity. The Quran reminds us again and again that Allah is not interested in the performance of righteousness. He is interested in the authenticity of righteousness. And authenticity begins with what you do when nobody is watching, when there is no praise to win, no criticism to avoid, no audience to impress. In that realm of secrecy, taqwa either lives or it dies. This is why the scholars used to say that a person's private life is the true measure of their piety. Public religiosity is easy, private discipline is difficult. Taqwa is not demonstrated by how loudly you speak about Allah, but by how you restrain your ego when only Allah sees you. If you reflect deeply, you'll notice that the greatest moral victories of your life were not witnessed by anyone. Nobody saw you put your phone away to avoid a forbidden glance. Nobody saw you swallow your anger in a moment where you could have humiliated someone. Nobody saw you forgive a person who wronged you, even though your ego wanted revenge. Nobody saw you delete a message you were tempted to send, or end a friendship that was pulling you into darkness, or give charity quietly even when you were struggling yourself. These silent decisions do not appear on social media, do not bring applause, and do not create popularity. Yet, in the sight of Allah, they are worth oceans more than a lifetime of public displays. This is the inner transformation of taqwa, the ability to regulate your impulses, manage your desires, and discipline your emotions for the sake of Allah. Psychologists today speak about emotional intelligence and self-regulation as indicators of maturity. Islam spoke about it centuries before, but through a spiritual lens. Emotional intelligence becomes spiritual intelligence when it is directed toward Allah. Self-regulation becomes taqwa when the motive is divine pleasure, not social reward. And moral discipline becomes worship when it is performed in private with sincerity. This inner transformation is not dramatic. It does not happen through one powerful lecture or one moment of inspiration, even though those moments may spark the journey. It happens through small, consistent, unseen choices. Little victories accumulate until the heart becomes purified, and the purified heart becomes capable of perceiving reality clearly. Taqwa sharpens your vision. Suddenly sins no longer look glamorous, they look hollow. Temptations lose their sweetness. You begin to see consequences where others see pleasure. You begin to feel heaviness in things that once entertained you. And most importantly, you feel a closeness to Allah that words cannot describe. One of the early scholars said, if you want to know your rank with Allah, look at where He finds you when no one else is around. The point is not fear, the point is awareness. Awareness that Allah sees the intentions behind your actions. Awareness that Allah records every whisper of sincerity. Awareness that Allah values your struggles even when no one else appreciates them. When this awareness settles into the heart, your private life becomes your sanctuary. It becomes the place where your soul breathes and your spirit is restored. A person with true taqwa cares more about cleansing the inner world than curating the outer image. They spend more energy on their hidden flaws than their public reputation. You will find such a person constantly interrogating their own heart, questioning their intentions and analyzing their motives. They fear hypocrisy not because they doubt Allah's mercy, but because they value their relationship with him too much to contaminate it. And this internal vigilance creates a calmness, a stability, a serenity that pours outward into every aspect of life. People begin to trust them, rely on them, and feel safe with them, not because of how much they preach, but because of how much they embody. When your inner world changes, everything else follows. Your speech becomes softer because your heart becomes softer. Your worship becomes deeper because your conscience becomes clearer. Your choices become wiser because your perception becomes sharper. This is why the Quran describes Taqwa as light, because it illuminates not only your actions but your intentions, your desires, your long-term direction. People without Taqwa move through life with reaction, emotion, and impulse. People of Taqwa move with clarity, purpose, and groundedness. So the first sign of true Taqwa is not what the world sees in you. It is what you see in yourself when you stand alone, unfiltered and unmasked. The question is not who you are in public, but who you are in private, because that private version of you is the one Allah elevates. And if you can elevate your private self, your public life will never betray you. One of the most revealing signs of Taqwa is the ability to walk away from something that tempts your ego, even when every part of you wants to hold on. And this is where the reality of Taqwa becomes very different from how people commonly describe it. Taqwa is not simply about avoiding haram because it is forbidden. It is about avoiding anything that pulls you away from Allah, even if your ego is deeply attracted to it. There is a difference between someone who avoids sin because they have no interest in it, and someone who avoids sin despite being tempted. The first group is simply fortunate. The second group is truly strong. When we talk about the ego or the nafs, we are referring to the part of you that is impulsive, demanding, restless, and easily seduced. It wants immediate pleasure, immediate validation, immediate gratification. It wants the world to orbit around your emotions and your desires. And so, when the ego is confronted with temptation, whether it is a forbidden glance, a toxic relationship, a dishonest opportunity, or a moment of anger, it reacts quickly and aggressively. The ego pushes to act, while Taqwa pushes to pause. The ego says, do it now, you might lose the chance. Taqwa says, think of what you will lose with Allah. That pause, the space between impulse and action, is where Taqwa reveals its true strength. Anyone can be religious when life is calm. Anyone can speak beautifully about piety when there is nothing to tempt them. But the moment your desires are awakened, the moment your anger rises, the moment your loneliness becomes heavy, the moment your pride feels threatened, that is when Taqwa is tested, and that is when true spiritual maturity is shown. There is something profoundly powerful about choosing restraint when indulgence is possible. A person who walks away from temptation even though it is easily accessible demonstrates mastery over their inner world. They are not controlled by desire. They control their desire. And that internal mastery is one of the greatest signs that Allah has granted a person sincerity and strength. Because if truth be told, anyone can appear righteous when they are not tested. But when the test comes and you still choose Allah, that is when the angels themselves honor your decision. Psychologists today talk about the concept of delayed gratification, the ability to choose long-term benefit over short-term pleasure. It is associated with emotional maturity, responsibility, intelligence, and self-control. Islam gives this concept a deeper meaning. In Islam, delayed gratification is not simply about discipline. It is about valuing the eternal over the temporary. The person of Taqwa is not saying, I don't want this desire. They are saying, what Allah has is better. They are not rejecting pleasure. They are choosing a higher pleasure. They are not denying themselves. They are protecting themselves. Reflect for a moment on the story of Yusuf a.s. His test was not simply a test of patience. It was a test of power, attraction, opportunity, and silence. No one would have known had he slipped. No one would have criticized him. No society would have blamed him. But because he feared Allah in private, Allah honored him in public. His ability to walk away from temptation becomes a timeless model of taqwa, not because he lacked desire, but because he mastered it. His victory was not over a woman, his victory was over himself. This is what taqwa looks like. It is the strength to walk away from a conversation that inflames your ego. It is the wisdom to end a friendship that pushes you towards sin. It is the courage to reject a business deal that seems profitable but is morally compromised. It is the humility to avoid a confrontation even when you feel justified. It is the maturity to remain silent when your ego desperately wants to speak. Every one of these decisions carries a cost, but the cost is nothing compared to the spiritual clarity you gain. There are moments in life when Allah opens a door not to reward you, but to test you. A door to sin, a door to pride, a door to anger, a door to ego. And in those moments, your choice reveals your reality. The believer with taqwa recognizes these moments as divine examinations. They understand that walking away is not weakness, it is victory, and sometimes the greatest act of worship is simply to say no, to turn your back on the very thing you want, to let your heart hurt for a moment so your soul can heal for a lifetime. And the irony is this: every time you walk away from something for the sake of Allah, you never lose. It may feel like a loss at first, loss of pleasure, loss of validation, loss of comfort, loss of companionship, but Allah replaces what you left with something infinitely better. It may not come immediately, it may not come in the form you expected, but it always comes because Allah never lets a sacrifice for Him go unrewarded. Walking away from temptation is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about suppressing desire. It is about elevating desire. It is about training the heart to crave what is pure, crave what is lasting, crave what brings barakah. And this training is not accomplished in one moment. It requires repetition, struggle, and sincere intention. But every battle you win makes the next battle easier because taqwa grows through practice. So give yourself permission to walk away. Not because you are weak, but because you are strong. Not because you fear losing something in this world, but because you fear losing something far greater with Allah. Real strength is not the ability to conquer others. It is the ability to conquer yourself. One of the most overlooked signs of taqwa is the habit of turning to Allah before making decisions, not after facing consequences. Most people only remember Allah when life begins to fall apart. They treat dua as a response to failure rather than a foundation for clarity. But a heart rooted in taqwa reverses this order completely. It consults Allah before the action, before the choice, before the leap, before the relationship, before the investment, before the confrontation. The person of taqwa does not wait for life to unravel. They seek divine guidance so that life doesn't unravel in the first place. There is something profoundly transformative about involving Allah early. It changes the psychology of decision making. It forces you to slow down, reflect, question your motives, and align your heart with what is morally sound rather than emotionally impulsive. When you bring Allah into your decisions from the beginning, your choices become clearer, your intentions become purer, and your outcomes, regardless of what they look like, carry barakah. And this is something many people only learn after years of regret. Decisions made without Allah often come with consequences, while decisions made with Allah always come with wisdom. When you ask people why they regret certain choices, you'll notice a common thread. Very few say, "I didn't know what to do." Most say, "I knew it wasn't right, but I acted anyway." Their intuition signaled danger, their conscience felt the discomfort, their heart whispered caution, but their ego spoke louder. Taqwa, is the habit of listening to the whisper of the heart before it has to shout through consequences. Allah places subtle signs inside your heart long before He places visible signs in your life. But to notice those early signals, you need to be spiritually awake. This is why the act of istikhara is not a ritual to be performed after your mind is already made up. It is a moment of surrender when the heart says, "O Allah, I may want this, but you know what I do not. Guide me to what is good for my faith, my life, and my future, and protect me from what will harm me, even if I am attracted to it." This level of humility, this willingness to hand over control, is one of the greatest signs of taqwa. It demonstrates that your trust in Allah overrides your trust in your own desires. There is also a psychological dimension here. Consultation with Allah forces you to confront your intentions. Sometimes you realize that what you are chasing is not aligned with your values, your principles, or your long-term well-being. And sometimes the very act of pausing to make dua allows the emotional intensity to settle enough for your rational mind to engage. In modern terms, it disrupts impulsive thinking, creates emotional regulation, and facilitates clarity. But spiritually, it trains you to remember that you are not the architect of your destiny, Allah is. A person lacking taqwa only turns to Allah when their plans collapse. A person of taqwa turns to Allah to build the plans in the first place. One lives reactively, the other proactively. One asks Allah to fix the damage, the other asks Allah to prevent the damage. And when you live reactively, life feels chaotic. But when you live proactively, with Allah at the center, life gains structure, coherence, and an inner calm that is difficult to describe. The companions of the Prophet letter, FDFA, would consult Allah even about the smallest matters, not because they doubted their own intelligence, but because they valued Allah's wisdom more. And Allah honored them with clarity, strength, and purpose. Today, people involve Allah only in matters that feel religious, not realizing that everything is religious when the intention is sincere. Your work, your education, your friendships, your finances, your relationships, these are all arenas of spirituality if you consciously place Allah in the decision-making process. And there is another dimension. When you turn to Allah early, you protect yourself from the self-inflicted pain that comes from stubbornly pursuing something that was never meant for you. Many heartbreaks could have been prevented had a person paused and asked, "Is this taking me closer to Allah or closer to my ego?" Many business failures could have been avoided had someone asked, "Is this halal, clean, and ethical?" Many emotional wounds could have been spared had someone asked, "Is this person good for my character and my akhira?" Taqwa transforms these questions from afterthoughts into starting points. The beauty of this mindset is that when things go right, you feel gratitude because you know Allah guided you. And when things don't go the way you hoped, you feel contentment because you know Allah protected you. There is no emotional turbulence, no confusion, no guilt, no regret. Just a quiet certainty that Allah's choice was better than your desire. When Allah becomes part of your decisions, even hardships feel lighter, because you know they came with His permission, not your recklessness. And even blessings feel sweeter, because you know they came with His approval, not your ego's insistence. So the question you must ask yourself is simple, but transformative. Asterisk, do I involve Allah early, or do I only return to Him when everything collapses? Asterisk, a believer with taqwa chooses the first path again and again until it becomes instinct, until it becomes character, until it becomes the lens through which they approach every major and minor decision. One of the most beautiful and underestimated signs of taqwa is the balance between gentleness in character and firmness in principles. It is one of the clearest indicators that a person has matured spiritually, psychologically, and morally, because anyone can be rigid and anyone can be soft, but it takes depth, sincerity, and a purified heart to be compassionate without compromising truth, and principled without becoming harsh. This balance is not accidental. It is the result of an inner world aligned with Allah. When you look at the life of the Prophet letter F, DFA, you find this balance perfected. He was gentle in his manner, approachable in his speech, patient in his responses. Yet he never wavered in justice, never diluted truth for approval, and never violated divine boundaries for the sake of convenience. His character was soft enough to attract hearts, but his principles were strong enough to shape civilizations. That is the blueprint of Taqwa, inner strength expressed through outward kindness. Many people misunderstand this dynamic. They assume that being gentle means being weak, or that being firm means being harsh. But in reality, weakness is when you compromise truth just to avoid conflict. Harshness is when you weaponize truth to feed your ego. Taqwa is neither of these. Taqwa is moral clarity without arrogance, and kindness without surrendering your values. It is the ability to stay rooted in what is right even when the world pulls you in other directions. This balance shows itself most clearly in moments of disagreement. When the ego enters a discussion, the goal becomes victory. But when Taqwa enters a discussion, the goal becomes guidance. A person of Taqwa can disagree without raising their voice, without belittling others, without turning a conversation into a battlefield. Their calmness is not passivity, it is strength. It is the strength that comes from a heart trained to speak for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of pride. Gentleness is not the absence of strength. Gentleness is controlled strength. It is what allows your message to reach the heart instead of stopping at the ears. Firmness, on the other hand, is not stubbornness. It is clarity. It is the refusal to betray your moral compass, even when compromise would be easier. And when these two qualities merge, they create a person who is both respected and loved. There is also a psychological dimension to this balance. People who lack inner security tend to compensate with either harshness or excessive softness. Some impose themselves on others because they cannot regulate their own emotions. Others surrender their boundaries because they fear rejection. But a heart anchored in Taqwa does not swing to these extremes. It is grounded, it is stable, it is centered, and this inner stability reflects outwardly in how the person speaks, listens, reacts, and treats people. A person of Taqwa can forgive others without feeling diminished. They can correct others without humiliating them. They can walk away from unnecessary arguments without feeling defeated. They can stay calm even when provoked because their dignity comes from Allah, not from controlling a narrative or winning a debate. And it is precisely this emotional composure that makes their principles shine even more brightly. One of the greatest signs of spiritual maturity is the ability to be gentle with people who are wrong, yet firm with the wrong itself. This ability requires emotional intelligence, humility, and sincerity. It requires the recognition that people are not your enemy, your ego is. When you aim to defeat the ego rather than the person, your tone changes, your intention shifts, and your words become healing instead of harmful. Taqwa teaches you that guiding someone is better than proving them wrong, and protecting your character is better than protecting your pride. Firmness in principles does not mean living a life of rigidity. It means being committed to what Allah has commanded, even when your emotions disagree. It means choosing integrity over convenience, honesty over gain, modesty over attention, and faith over fear. These choices, repeated consistently, shape a character that becomes trustworthy, dependable, and morally unshakable. And such a person naturally becomes a source of stability for others. Gentleness in conduct, on the other hand, is what makes your principles accessible. Kindness opens doors, humility softens hearts, Patience builds trust. People are more likely to listen to someone who speaks with respect than someone who speaks with force. Even truth, when delivered harshly, loses its impact, but when truth is delivered with compassion, it becomes transformative. And this combination, compassionate delivery and principled content, is one of the most powerful forms of dawah. Taqwa is not only about your relationship with Allah, it is also about how that relationship shapes your interactions with His creation. And the more pure your heart becomes, the more naturally this balance emerges. Your principles protect you. Your gentleness benefits others, your clarity keeps you upright, your kindness keeps you human. You become a person who does not bend when it comes to right and wrong, yet does not break others in the process of standing firm. You become someone whose presence brings calm, whose words bring clarity, and whose actions bring trust. And that is why this balance is a sign of true taqwa. It is a sign that the heart is guided, the ego is restrained, and the soul is aligned with divine light. One of the most telling signs of true taqwa is consistency in worship. Even when the heart feels dry and the spiritual high has faded, anyone can be devoted when emotions are strong, when inspiration is fresh, when the environment is uplifting. But the person of taqwa is the one who continues to pray even when they feel nothing, who continues to make dhikr even when the tongue feels heavy, who continues to avoid sin even when desires are loud, and who continues to uphold their commitments to Allah even when motivation is low. That consistency is not a small thing. It is a window into the depth of a person's sincerity. We live in a time where people romanticize spirituality. They associate faith with emotional experiences, with moving lectures, with powerful du'as, with nights that feel transformative. And yes, these moments are real gifts from Allah, but they are not the foundation of faith. They are the refreshments along the journey. The foundation of taqwa is discipline, the willingness to stay committed, even when your feelings are not cooperating. When you keep going in those moments of dryness, you demonstrate that your worship is not dependent on mood, nor is your obedience dependent on pleasure. It is dependent only on Allah. This is where many people misunderstand their own spiritual states. They assume that when their heart feels distant, when salah feels mechanical, when dhikr feels repetitive, or when dua feels empty, something is wrong with them. But nothing could be further from the truth. Spiritual dryness is part of the journey. Even the greatest scholars and worshippers experienced fluctuations. Even the companions experienced moments where their hearts felt heavy. The difference is not that they were immune to spiritual lows. The difference is that they kept going despite them. A heart rooted in taqwa refuses to let temporary emotions dictate permanent habits. It understands that feelings rise and fall, but Allah remains constant. And so, the worship continues not because the heart feels alive in the moment, but because the heart is loyal. The person of taqwa knows that consistency is what nourishes faith, even when faith feels weak. The Prophet _FDA taught us that the most beloved actions to Allah are those done consistently, even if small. Why? Because consistency shapes character. Consistency forms identity. Consistency builds resilience. Anyone can act beautifully once. Only the sincere can act beautifully repeatedly. There is also a psychological dimension to this. Modern psychology recognizes the power of habit and repetition in shaping a person's mind and emotional well-being. Faith works the same way. The more consistent your worship is, the more your heart becomes conditioned to return to Allah instinctively. Even when your heart is tired, your body knows its routine, your mind knows its path, your soul remembers its direction. And slowly, often without you noticing, Allah begins to revive the spiritual sweetness you thought was lost. But this revival comes to those who remain patient in the drought. If a farmer abandoned his crops every time the rain stopped, no harvest would ever come. The person of Taqwa understands that the seeds of worship must be watered even when the soil looks dry. Because Allah is the one who brings life back to the hearts, just as He brings life to the barren earth. And there is something incredibly profound about the worship you do in moments of struggle. When you pray even though your heart feels distant, that prayer is more beloved to Allah than the prayer prayed in spiritual comfort. When you force yourself to say SUB letter 1 E2, 5 a Macron and Allah, even though your tongue resists, that D, Hikr carries a weight that angels record with honor. When you lower your gaze while your desires burn, that moment is more precious than 1,000 moments of easy obedience. It is in these difficult acts that sincerity is purified, ego is dismantled, and the soul grows. Consistency also protects you from the trap of spiritual performance. Some people only worship when others are watching, or when they feel inspired, or when they fear losing their reputation. But the person of Taqwa worships even in silence, even in solitude, even when no one knows. Their consistency is a reflection of their private relationship with Allah, not their public image. And that private worship is what shields the heart from hypocrisy and strengthens it against spiritual instability. Moreover, consistency in worship even during spiritual dryness is a form of humility. It is an acknowledgement that we are dependent on Allah's mercy, not on our emotional states. It teaches us that we do not worship for feelings, we worship because He is worthy of worship. And very often, it is this humility that becomes the doorway to spiritual revival. Allah lifts the person who continues to remember Him even when their heart is struggling to feel His closeness. This steady commitment also builds spiritual resilience. Life will not always be uplifting. There will be grief, stress, doubt, fear, temptation, loneliness, and moments where your faith is shaken. But the habits you built during calm days will protect you during stormy ones. The believer who prays regularly in times of ease will find strength in those same prayers during times of difficulty. The believer who remembers Allah daily will find Allah comforting them during moments of pain. This resilience is one of the gifts of Taqwa. In short, consistency is the bridge between temporary inspiration and long-term transformation. It is what turns fleeting motivation into lasting character. It is what differentiates those who talk about spirituality from those who truly embody it. One of the most profound signs of true Taqwa is the ability to hold yourself accountable before pointing a finger at anyone else. It's easy, almost instinctive, to shift blame outward. The ego loves to protect itself. It loves excuses, justifications, and narratives where we are always the victim and never the cause. But a heart refined by Taqwa reverses this natural reflex. Instead of asking, "Who wronged me?" it asks, "Where did I go wrong?" Instead of assuming the world is at fault, it begins by examining its own intentions, reactions, and shortcomings. This attitude is not self-loathing, it is self-awareness. It is not guilt, it is growth. It is not weakness, it is spiritual maturity. When we look at the companions, at the great scholars, and at those whose hearts radiated with Taqwa, one quality stands out consistently. They held themselves to a higher standard than they held anyone else. They criticized their own intentions before judging another's actions. They corrected their own hearts before trying to correct someone else's behavior. They saw their inner weaknesses as more urgent than the outer flaws of others. And because of this, they lived with deep humility. The opposite attitude, the habit of blaming others, is spiritually destructive. It feeds pride. It strengthens the ego. It blinds the heart to its own faults. A person who constantly externalizes blame becomes stagnant because they never recognize what needs changing within themselves. They live their entire life reacting to others rather than leading themselves. And nothing blocks spiritual growth more than this. Taqwa introduces a different psychology into your life. Instead of viewing criticism as an attack, you view it as an opportunity. Instead of defending your ego with excuses, you allow yourself to reflect. Instead of seeking validation, you seek truth. A person of taqwa lives with an inner lens that turns inward before turning outward. This doesn't mean they blame themselves for everything, but it means they begin with themselves. And this is one of the clearest signs of spiritual intelligence. When the believer makes a mistake, even a small one, they feel discomfort not because they fear people's opinions, but because they fear losing Allah's pleasure. They are not afraid of appearing wrong. They are afraid of being wrong in the sight of Allah. This creates a deep sense of vigilance, a quiet internal watchfulness over the heart's subtle movement, its impulses, its intentions, its desires. The person of taqwa knows that the heart can be deceptive. They understand that Shaitan does not always push with force. Sometimes he whispers with logic. And so they remain alert. This self-accountability is not a constant state of self-criticism. It is a balanced awareness. It is the habit of checking your intentions. Why am I doing this? Who am I trying to impress? What outcome am I seeking? It is the habit of pausing after a heated moment to ask. Did I speak kindly? Was I fair? Was my reaction proportionate? It is the willingness to apologize even when your ego resists. It is the courage to admit fault even when you could easily conceal it. And it is the serenity that comes from knowing that every correction of the self elevates you spiritually. A person who regularly holds themselves accountable becomes emotionally stable. They stop needing to win arguments. They stop needing to justify every flaw. They stop needing the approval of others. Their peace comes from their honesty with Allah and with themselves. And people sense this sincerity. They trust it. They feel safe around it. Because someone who holds themselves accountable is someone who will not harm others recklessly. And if they do, they will make it right. There is also a profound psychological strength in self-accountability. It shifts you from victimhood to responsibility, from helplessness to empowerment. When you acknowledge your role in a situation, you gain the ability to change it. When you recognize your patterns, you gain the ability to break them. When you take ownership of your intentions, you gain freedom from the ego's manipulations. This is the opposite of weakness. This is mastery. And yet, this quality is rare. Why? Because it requires honesty. It requires humility. It requires the courage to confront parts of yourself that are uncomfortable. But it is precisely in confronting those parts that transformation begins. Taqwa is not just about avoiding sin. It is about refining the heart. And there is no refinement without self-accountability. The Quran describes successful believers as those who make muhasaba who take themselves to account before they are taken to account. This mindset creates a kind of inner transparency. You begin to understand your triggers, your weaknesses, your blind spots. And that understanding becomes your shield. It protects you from repeating mistakes. It protects you from falling into arrogance. It protects you from walking through life with a distorted sense of self. And something remarkable happens when you develop this habit. Your judgment of others softens, your patience increases, your empathy deepens, because once you have confronted your own flaws, you no longer have the appetite to magnify the flaws of others. You begin to see people not as problems, but as fellow travelers struggling, learning, growing, falling, and rising again. In a world that constantly encourages you to project outward, to defend your image, to justify your actions, to blame circumstances and people, self-accountability becomes an act of courage. It becomes a rebellion against the ego. It becomes a path to closeness with Allah. And at the end of the day, this habit does something extraordinary. It keeps your heart alive. Because a heart that watches itself cannot become arrogant. A heart that corrects itself cannot become corrupted. A heart that humbles itself cannot become spiritually blind. So hold yourself accountable before you hold others. Question your intentions before you question their actions. Refine your heart before you attempt to refine the world.